Tom Verbeek is the VP of HR, Talent and Organizational Development at CommScope. A little bit about Tom before he pops on and joins the virtual stage. Hi, Tom. Tom is currently oversees the diversity and inclusion, talent acquisition, learning and development, talent management, leadership development, employee experience, culture, change, and OD practices for CommScope's nearly 30,000 employees globally across more than 60 countries. So he basically does everything. Tom is going to be talking about reimagining learning, the strategic role of building a social learning culture. So with that, Tom, are you able to unmute and join us? Wonderful.
Yeah, you should be able to hear me. Is the audio okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
So I will toss the mic over to you, Tom, and I'll have you get started.
Great. Thank you, Charlene, for that intro. It's always impressive to hear someone else talk about you. It doesn't happen all the time. So thank you for that. And hello and good morning to everyone. It is truly an honor to be here today presenting to you alongside many of my colleagues in the industry. I saw the impressive list of speakers, so I'll be dipping in and out of many presentations today as well. This is obviously a new format, so it's quite special to be presenting through Zoom to so many people while you can't actually see those people. I'll try and make it as engaging as possible. I'm hoping for as many questions as you have as well. And my profile is also on the lobby, so please reach out if you've got any questions about the content today as well. For today, I have a presentation lined up for you that talks about the strategic role of building a social learning culture at CommScope. I want to start by saying my own experience in attending these conferences is that really I go there to find ideas and nuggets of inspiration for things that I'm dealing with in my organization. And so my personal goal and what I'm trying to do today is to give you our journey so that you can maybe pick up some relevant facts, ideas, suggestions, all in the philosophy of keep the best and leave the rest, because this is our journey. I'm here to tell it to you, but I hope that it will resonate and it will give you some nuggets of learning and insights that you can take away for your own organizations. I also want to say a huge thanks to my team. A lot of the material that you will see today is homegrown, is developed inside through my talent organization. I'm very proud of my team, and we work together daily to produce these insights. So it's really cool to be able to show you some of it today. I also have a bit of a challenge for you. A lot of people ask me, based on my accent in English, where I'm from. I'm not going to give it away. If you have a hunch, then please just drop me a note and a message in the lobby under the portal that we're all in. I can tell you that not many people get that right. If you do know already and you've worked with me in the past, that doesn't count. You're not allowed to enter, but for people that don't know me, please do. So going into content now, what I'm going to do is attempt to tell you a 2-year culture journey story in 20 to 25 minutes. I don't know why I do this to myself. I do it all the time. So I'm going to attempt to give you the high-level overview of the journey we've been on to define culture and learning in our organization. In order to do that, I feel I have to go through a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to start with some insights into our organization and organization context, then move to give you an overview of our culture journey we've been on, and then pivot to social learning and what it means to us in our organization and how it can support our culture journey to start with. I'll then conclude with some lessons learned, some things that we've seen throughout the years that hopefully are also interesting and relevant for you as well. But so to start with CommScope as an organization. CommScope is in the business of connecting people. We are an infrastructure telecommunications company. We are in the mobile and broadband technology, and essentially we build material that connects the world through data and internet. Connectivity obviously has never been so important as in the last year or so in facing a global pandemic. We believe that connectivity has truly changed the world and our lives within it, right? More than ever. It keeps us in touch with each other. It educates our children. it informs us, and it also entertains us. A lot of studies show that we've never relied on the internet as much as through the global pandemic. And so our mission really in CommScope is to connect the world through our technology. So it's been quite an inspiring couple of years to really work for our company. A couple of details around what we look like. We're a Fortune 500 company of approximately 30,000 innovators. We're all involved in innovation in this company, with one of the most comprehensive portfolios in the industry for telecommunications equipment. Our $800 million R&D investment kind of gets us to roughly building up around 15,000 patents and counting. And with over 10,000 partners worldwide, we do have a global reach, and so we touch pretty much every market in the world as well. Looking at our industry, though, and this is quite a crucial slide to really understand our context in this organization. We come a long way since 1976 in shaping the most dynamic and technically challenging environment in the world. Right? It all started with two-way radio and broadcasting equipment back in the 70s. And obviously, as we all know, the bandwidth demand and internet usage, the Internet of Things, has really kind of evolved and shaped our information age as we are in now. The organization kind of follows this evolution. And so we've gone through several acquisitions in this company to really kind of prepare ourselves for the evolution of Internet and the evolution of the technology itself. One key fact that is really determining in here is that every 3 to 4 years since the 2000s, transformational acquisition has doubled our size in the organization, but also our employee base. And so this exponential growth is not only something that's happened in the industry, it's something that's happened to our company. This comes to a head in 2019, where we faced an acquisition with a company called Eris, essentially doubling our turnover from around $5 billion to a $10 billion company. At that point, we with the executive team said, look, we really need to push the reset button here because we're a different company and we need to decide what we're about, why we exist in the first place, and why people would work for us, given that we are no longer the same. This really sparked a culture journey for us, where we started engaging with our executives. We went through a process of interviews, data collection, culture analysis. We engaged with global leaders. We defined global transformation ambassadors, pulled leaders together in workshops, and eventually got to this model of culture that really still defines us as we speak. This is the model that we've held true in our culture definition for many years, and really talks about an alignment of values, vision, and goals, with a translation into, on the right-hand side, the business environment and our strategy and the what, and on the left-hand side of the pyramid, the how. The behaviors that shape us, that define us, and that ultimately get translated in initiatives, workflows, and systems on the business side, and obviously people, processes, and behavior on the left-hand side. In order to do that, we got to a definition of a couple of things. We redefined our purpose in the organization. We defined a vision for our organization, and below that, defined our new values in this corporation. We then aligned the strategy to all of these values, and then defined our behaviors in its ways of working that really support all of that. I want to show you a glimpse of what this looks like. There's a lot of content on this slide, and as such, the detail doesn't matter. But I think this is really the framework and the background and where our learning journey started as well. We define our purpose as being, we create lasting connections. It has served us really well through the pandemic. In times where we're all looking for connections, they're simply not face-to-face, but we rely on our business and the human touch for these connections as well. To a vision where we're saying, through innovation, we're going to push the boundaries of technology. This is all aspirational in its way. And then our values really start to define our behavior. Now, what does this all mean? And I want to get to social learning here in a bit. We really then looked at how do we activate all of that? As long as we have a culture definition in this organization, it really only is a poster on a wall. So we also know that culture implementations are only successful when companies start to operate accordingly. And when we drill down to behavior, processes, and really start to see changes on an everyday basis, right? And so we really started this journey of embedding culture in everything we do, also from a talent and a learning perspective. We eventually, a couple of months ago, arrived at the conclusion that social learning really sits at the heart of further embedding and driving that culture through the organization. And so for the rest of the keynote speech, I kind of want to spend a bit of time on the why, how, and what of how we define social learning in CommScope. I know it's a bit of a buzzword, actually. You can start to see it more and more. For me, frankly, personally, it's not really a new concept. We've been talking about social learning in organizational psychology for decades. I think the term originates back to the 1950s and really just covers a fundamental principle of learning that people simply learn faster, better, and retain more easily if they learn from one another or learn within a social context. We all know this, right? A lot of learning theories have always been based on this notion that blended learning drives better retention, drives better implementation. But I think the technology that we're seeing evolving in the marketplace has really kind of sped up and given us a different angle to this definition of social learning. So in order to kind of delve into this concept a bit more, I want to talk about three things. One, the trends that we've observed out in the marketplace, stakeholder feedback internally, secondly, that we've received around business needs from a learning point of view, and then our redefinition of what we're calling the employee experience. And it all leads to then finalizing my kind of definition of what social learning means to us. So just to begin with trends, I would be remiss to mention the year 2020. And I always think that pictures speak louder than words. I feel like we all in our professional and our personal environment have had to deal with the pandemic, the consequences of remote work on a professional side, but also the consequences of everything that's happened and the escalations and just the personal things that we've all had to deal with that have really made balancing work life such a challenge over the last year and a half. I think some of these pictures hopefully speak to you and your environment, and certainly does to me, being kind of US based, but having families spread across the globe that we haven't seen for many years as well. Now, this is the backdrop against which we were redefining HR, talent, and learning. From there, I want to mention a great study I came across in January by Jean Meister, who's involved in the future of work. You may have seen some of this work. As part of that publication, she had kind of listed the 10 really important things looking ahead at 2021 that we're going to drive our trends in HR. We certainly resonate with them in CommScope. Many of these are conversations we're having, but I want to lift one out in particular, the re-engineering and transformation of corporate learning. This is a learning and development summit, so this is where our focus lies today. But I think the statement, time is now, is very just. We also know that, frankly, the industry of learning was already on an acceleration path, right? Research and Markets has forecasted that the e-learning market was predicted to triple by 2025 to reach somewhere along the $325 billion mark as a business itself. And that was before the pandemic. I've not seen updated numbers, but I would bet that this has tripled or exponentially increased ever since. I've also seen studies that have kind of confirmed that on the innovation side, companies are starting to innovate in learning spaces way more than ever before, right? I've seen data points of a company called Mersion who are involved in this kind of seminar as well today. That 72% of companies are actually reporting starting to use virtual reality as part of their learning and development. That's gone up from around 35% the year before. So a doubling of companies is saying that they're starting to innovate with virtual reality as part of their learning strategies. So clearly something is up and change is coming in the world of learning. At the same time, I want to mention the fact that we also truly believe that leadership as a definition and the requirements of leadership have fundamentally shifted. How we see a leader in our day and age and the characteristics that make up a great leader, we think have shifted to become more human-centric. Josh Burson agrees with us, and he's certainly one of the leading analysts in this space, right? But we call it the new T&E, and this is a term that was coined by my CHRO. T&E before the pandemic was travel and entertainment. It was the expenses we made to travel. We are replacing this by a new T&E, which is called trust and empathy. And I think it really kind of shows that the leadership definition itself is fully transformed and really needs to be part of our learning strategies as we go through our redefinitions. In addition to that, the other trend we're seeing is because we live in an increasingly connected world, relying on connectivity to keep us in touch, educate, and inform us, that learning really is happening anywhere. This is even more the case in global pandemic, but we know that learning has moved away from the office space, and this is not a new fact, right? This has been the case for many, many years. And just to sum it up, I mentioned this quote many times internally as well. It's part of our HR strategy work, but we're really seeing that the coronavirus is a time machine to the future. Changes that we knew were coming, or many of us had predicted would happen over decades, have taken place in the span of weeks. I remember Satya Nadella talking about the digital transformation and 3 years of digital transformation taking place in 3 months. But I think it's a crucial way of looking at what we're seeing today is the acceleration of what was happening already. I see a lot of articles talking about new trends. I would argue they're not new. They're accelerated trends that we've seen happening over the last few years, but really have intensified and exponentially increased. What does that mean for the learning function, though? I want to share some startling facts I found around how COVID-19 and the global pandemic have impacted learning functions globally. And so I've got a couple of data points here that really kind of try to put some color around this. First of all, 63% of companies have developed specific trainings to support employees in working remotely, while 60% of employees are consuming more learning content than ever before. Suddenly the audience for learning content and the engagement, and I hope that many of my fellow learning professionals have seen this in their company, the engagement and just behavior has changed, and the expectations to the learning functions have changed as well. Learning departments have largely pivoted their learning options to either deliver virtually, cancel anything they had, and or convert to digital assets. The conversion is huge and has sparked so much work and so much kind of translations and just work for our learning functions and for my learning departments over the last year as well. Now, almost all L&D teams have started curating and offering resources to help employees operate virtually. The move to remote work has obviously caused quite a learning need, which has been addressed by L&D's teams globally as well. And lastly, we've just overall seen a huge increase in new virtual offerings and content creation. So these are some of the things that we're seeing happening. I would argue that that is truly a shift over the last 12 to 18 months that we've really never seen before in the history of our function. In addition, we went out to business stakeholders and our HR stakeholders and saw that learning was at the top of the charts of perceived need internally. When we were talking to business execs and leaders, they were talking about learning bundles, collaboration, problem solving in teams, gamifying, leveraging technology and AI. So apart from the external trends, this was just another input to tell us that learning really sat at the core of what we needed to reinvent. And then lastly, I think from an employee experience point of view, all of these trends, I think, mean for companies that we really need to dive into a bit of a redefinition of how we look at the employee experience. Protecting workers or organizing ways in which we give employees more flexible benefits, improving work at home programs, and overall just focusing on well-being and health, I think has fundamentally become the forefront of our discussions. In just a few months, employees have climbed a steep learning curve as well in having to deal with the new ways of working. And so that poses a different expectation on the employee experience side as well. Employees are zooming in on leadership programs and looking at what's of strategic and business relevance. So I think the focus on empathy, resilience, caring, and safety really need to become part of how we look at leadership development. And then obviously the role of empowering people, giving them tools to succeed and continue to adapt it becomes equally important. And resilience is a term that I've really heard mentioned in many seminars, conversations I've been involved in externally as well. Now, this is all context. Let's just try and get a bit more tangible now in terms of what this means. I want to show you this quote because I truly believe that it is important. I see a lot of discussions when it comes to learning that focus on the technology and the solutions itself. I didn't want to do that today because I wanted to focus on what we were seeing and the needs that exist, because truly I feel like HR departments and learning departments really need to start by defining what they're going to do and how they're going to use their solutions before going to technology. We did use internally the model you see up on the right-hand side of the slide to move into a prioritization of what social learning culture was going to mean for us as a company. We found this model really useful because it really describes the full scope of potential solutions that learning solutions would give an organization. But there was a relevance discussion here in terms of what does this mean for us in CommScope and how would it help our business needs, but also the trends we're observing. As a consequence, in supporting the culture implementation that I showed you, we ended up, I guess, agreeing internally that the notion of helping plan employees' careers, the notion of driving consumption of data, especially in a remote and virtual work environment, really was crucial. And that the notion of helping employees discovering content that develop them in their current job, but also future-proofing them for skills that may be necessary in the future as an organization and as a strategic capability was truly what we wanted to focus on. And then I think this is an obvious one, but the analysis and measurement piece then kind of relies on top just to be able to follow up and measure effectiveness of what we're doing as well. So all of this to say there's a couple of things that we wanted to accomplish with social learning that we think respond to the external trends, respond to the internal input we've got, but also support our long-term culture journey. And so there's a couple of things that we've been looking at and we've been building out. And I wanted to make this supplier agnostic because I truly believe that solutions and technology are different for different companies and need to be tailored to the business needs. And so I just want to stick to what was important for us, but I'm going to run through some of these priorities that I hope resonate for you as well in defining solutions and redesigning learning. First one, LXP. For us, the experience was as important as ever in learning. We wanted to give people a platform that really enabled them to engage with the right content. We come from a place in CommScope where learning was all too often transactional, where learning was simply a compliance-related thing or something that was assigned to people. We believe that the experience around learning really is important to give people a technology that they could relate with and find content that addresses their needs. Open source. The other one that we really wanted to look at was, if you look at our behavior and our learning needs, a lot of people, including myself, go to open source content before anything else. And so we were actually seeing behavior internally of employees going out to external sources to find learning rather than our internal platform. So we're now building an open source content and curation of content into our solutions as we speak to hopefully drive internal consumption of that learning content. When it comes to social, our definition of social really lies around sharing communities and engagement. Engagement with the content, but also engagement with each other. Finding those experts in the organization that are willing to share and creating engagement and momentum in a social way around learning is really what we're about. And then there are things here around microbursts that were important for us. We all know that people don't spend hours behind a screen anymore. So this notion of finding content in the flow of work, delivering content when people have an attention span these days of 2 to 3 minutes, and I've seen studies that think that 2 to 3 minutes is too much these days. But so this delivering of short snap content is also not a new concept, but really wanted to play a pivotal role in our strategy here. Anywhere, anytime, any place. Virtual work speaks to this, but also just thinking back to where we know learning happens, which is anywhere. And so we wanted to enable access to learning wherever this takes place. Blended, for me, remains a core concept. All too often, I see a move to digital, thinking that we can replace human interaction in learning. I feel like it is always a balance, right? And that the notion of building in touch points, building in peer interactions, building in that learning really is crucial to advance a learning culture in an organization. And so we're trying to move away from the traditional model, but keep the strengths of what we call blended learning. And then upskilling, reskilling, there's always an internal discussion here around core capabilities, strategic capabilities, and what we think we need to drive as a learning strategy in this organization. And then lastly, because this supports the culture journey, we are looking at ways to drive learning to the right behaviors and the right skills. And those skills are derived from our cultural model, our values, and our ways of working. We're actually in the middle of building additional pathways and bundles that really support the behavioral implementation of learning so that it really becomes a continuation of our culture journey as you've seen it. This takes me to my last slide, which is a couple of lessons learned. I see I have only a couple of minutes left as well. That's what happens if you try and cram 2 years into a short session. But certainly a couple of lessons learned and reflections from us is the long road of embedding is ahead of us. Culture and learning journeys are never a short-term implementation. They're essentially never done. And I think the realization that we keep constructing, building, adapting, pivoting really is important for us. The old paradigm still exists for me, though, of executive buy-in, the notion of leaders taking ownership and responsibility of learning as a way of doing business and as a way of managing their people really continues to be a cornerstone, I think, of the success of any learning strategy. And then organizational culture and how you build that bottom up. I all too often see top-down approaches to culture. I remember Ulrich talking about a bottom-up, top-down, and sideways implementation of culture, which still helps me today to think about how to do that. And certainly there's more information out there if you want to dive into that. And then lastly, to conclude, before I'll open up and see if there's any questions, the plan is never the plan. We've probably rewritten the plan as many times as we designed it in the first place. That's what happens these days. I think in this world of change, we talk to our teams about plans, but we also talk about the realization that this will likely pivot in a month. That's okay, as long as there's a plan and an end goal. And I think that end goal really remains the key to driving outcomes that are relevant for the business. So with that, I will hand over to maybe Charlene to check in and see whether there were any questions on that.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I am back in. Want to throw in a question, but very briefly, Tom, We have a
Yep.
few guesses that came in terms of where your accent may be from. So
Shoot. Does anyone have
Dave,
enough?
Dave said that he put three guesses: Norway, Finland, or Sweden. And
Okay.
then my team, Jamie said Wales, and then Bonnie on my team said Belgium.
So one of them is correct, which is already quite impressive. And
You're not going to make me guess, right? Because I don't know.
okay, Charlene, just give me your guess, and then I'll give you the solution.
When Wales popped up, I thought maybe Wales.
That's the wrong one. No, it's actually Belgium. I'm originally Flemish, so my first language is Dutch. So I'm from the northern part of Belgium, close to the Netherlands. Having lived abroad for 2 decades, including the UK and London, and then Japan for a couple of years, it's tainted my accent beyond. So it's always a fun one to start guessing.
I appreciated it. I appreciate it. So Bonnie got that right from Belgium. But so I thank you so much, Tom, for sharing. We are at time, but if we have some questions that pop in, I'll get those over to you. In terms of, want to remind everyone that you can post questions in the Q&A, but people can also direct message our speakers. If you go to the
Yep.
lounge and you find the speakers, you can click that button and send your message directly to Tom. So something may, come about after the presentation.
Please do as well. I welcome any conversation about any of this because it's a passion of mine, and so I certainly want to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Tom. A lot of information there. Loved everything you said about social learning. And the plan is never the plan. I bolded that. I really appreciate that insight. So, with that, I thank you, wish you well. We'll have to welcome our next keynote presenter to the stage. And I hope I see
Bye
you
bye.
in the lounge, seeing some of the sessions later today, Tom.
Will do. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.